All right, we're that time of year where Tom Pelissero is not joining us from the front seat of his car going to some guy vacation on his off time. The off time is over. He went back together weekend, and now we're just in the roll of things, regular work week. Tom Pelissero, where in the world are you right now, Tom?
Stop number 8 on the training camp tour, currently in Tampa with the Buccaneers. The real feel was 104 degrees when I checked it earlier today, but I've been assured by everyone here, including Hassan Reddick a few minutes ago, this was the best feeling day that they have had out here during the course of training camp. It is hot. It is sticky. This was maybe not the best environment to test out the new longer hair.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to know.
Utilizing here. But it's been 90 plus degrees everywhere I've been. This is stop number 8. And considering that I'm spending the rest of this, the following week in the Southeast, I'm probably not catching a break.
Tom Pelissero here with the weather and the traffic and all and the hair and the whole business.
Attaboy.
All right, let's
That's
start.
my boys over there, too.
Okay.
Tom.
And during our pleasantries, TJ already shot a video of Chris, and he's texting it to you, and the stupidity has begun. So let's get to the actual matters at hand. Terry McClaurin has asked for a trade. Tom, I give you the floor here. What does this mean? What happens next? Why did he feel the need to do this, do you think?
There are certain buttons, Rich, that anybody can press when you get deep into a contract negotiation that's really not moving down the tracks. For Terry McClaurin, I mean, this was apparent from the end of last season. This goes all the way back to the combine, that there was an acknowledgement that Terry McClaurin was not going to play on the roughly $20 million that he's owed in 2025. And the question was going to be, what would be the number that would get a McClaurin deal done? You can look at some of the other wide receiver contracts that have gotten done through the course of the offseason and certainly make an argument that Terry McClaurin should be somewhere in, is it the $32, $34 million range? Certainly something that begins with a 3. The Commanders, who are looking at this, they're in year 2 of a new regime, coming off of, really impressive first season, obviously for Jaden Daniels, Dan Quinn and company, but they're also, like every team, trying to, think about their long-term budgeting plans and everything else. McClaurin's been one of the most consistent receivers in the NFL, 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's a pillar in the community. He's a guy who's been, really strong locker room presence, and he's been through a lot. I mean, it's a lot to play your whole career in Washington the way things have been going prior to last season. I know that everybody likes to just say at times like this, pay the man. Well, there have been conversations about it. The Commanders would like to do an extension, just not at the same numbers that McClaurin is looking for. And so, he had the holdout. Then it was essentially a hold in. He did have a real ankle injury that he rehabbed at the end of last season. He's on the PUP list right now. And now it's a trade request. I mean, those are the buttons you can push. You try to create a little bit of calamity and chaos around the team, make them answer certain questions that, might not be the thing you want to be talking about through the course of training camp. Do I anticipate that Terry McClaurin gets traded? Certainly, I would not say it's impossible, and there would be teams willing to make a Terry McClaurin trade. However, it's August. Like we're beyond the point of where you could replace a Terry McClaurin for your team. And so this is a challenging situation, as it has been. And there's still decisions that are going to have to be made if this doesn't move in terms of a new contract here. At what point does Terry McClaurin declare himself cured and gets on the field? At what point did the Commanders say, hey, you got to play on this deal? All those things remain to be seen. But this was the logical next step, barring a contract that really the size have not been even close on.
No, I mean, we went down the list at the top of the show of trade demands that were made, and everybody went back together and kumbaya at the end. Lamar Jackson is the biggest name that you could pretty much figure out. And Brandon Ayuk in terms of the wide receiver department is one of them as well. So, what's the number? What do you think? Is it DK's number that he's shooting at? Is it Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb's number that he's shooting at? What do you think it is? Because they have to do it, Tom. They can't trade him. And he's not going to play under the current deal. Like there's a number. The number exists. Tom,
listen, you can make an argument that Terry McClaurin, just based upon how the market moves, at some of those deals you're referring to, like Jefferson got done over a year ago. You can make the argument that Terry McClaurin should be in that range. Just me thinking and having a general understanding of the market dynamics,
right.
I would say somewhere in the low 30s is probably where a Terry McClaurin deal gets done. And listen, he was on a deal that 3 years ago was market value, but the $20 million receiver 3 years ago is now the $30 million receiver here. That's where you see these massive contracts like the one that DK Metcalf got. It's still the biggest deal, even after TJ Watt signed his extension. It's still the biggest money in terms of total dollars deal in Steelers history for a guy who hadn't even played a snap there. Terry McClaurin has been through a lot. This is the first year that he would even have the same starting quarterback 2 years in a row since he got to Washington here. But there are teams that, fundamentally are going to look at a 30-year-old wide receiver and say, we're just not comfortable making that investment for years to come, which, listen, every team's got to make their own decisions. These are challenging when you're talking about third contract players. But the argument from Terry McClaurin and his agent, Buddy Baker, I'm sure would be, well, if you're not going to pay him, why not trade him? Why didn't you trade him back before the draft when you could replace him? That would have been the logical time to do it. We're still rolling through this thing. But as you mentioned, Rich, we see trade requests every year. And it's like it's all, I don't want to say part of the playbook, but it's just, we all know the different buttons you can push. The trade demand is kind of the last ditch effort, the last thing that you can do here. And if Washington just continues to say, hey, we're not going to trade you, we want to sign you, but not at that number, then McLaurin's going to have to, make some decisions. Is he going to ultimately show up, play on that number, or play on an upgraded one-year contract I don't think that he really has an interest in? Or is he going to take the best deal that he can possibly get on a multi-year contract? Those are the different things that are moving forward here. We're down to about 5 weeks before the opener, and we'll see how it shakes.
Our guy, my guy, Tom Pelissero, chiming in here from Tampa Bay Buccaneers training camp right here on the first Friday of August on the Rich Eisen Show. You talk about buttons pushing when you're looking for leverage in a contractual standoff like Terry McClaurin in Washington. Our colleague from The Athletic, Diana Rossini, sent out a tweet today that Micah Parsons is considering drastic measures because the relationship has deteriorated to a certain point. And I guess the drastic measures would be leaving camp, right? And walk me through what that would look like if that is the choice Micah Parsons intends to make here.
I don't quite know what considering drastic measures means. I would think anybody who's frustrated in a contract negotiation would be considering all their options. If you leave camp, then they can send you a 5-day letter, and there's all kinds of different things that would happen at that point. For Micah Parsons, you go all the way back to March, and Jerry Jones has said it himself. He thought that they had a deal in place, and it would have made Micah at the time by far the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. But Jerry also made clear that he had never actually talked to Micah Parsons' agent about that, David Mulugeta, who did over $1 billion in contracts last year. He's not a hard guy to get a hold of. You can pick up the phone and call him. It's all been a little bit odd. I know that, Stephen Jones pushed back recently on the idea that, they just like the media to keep talking about him, so they drag these things out. They kind of have this history of taking the maximum time possible, just like they did last year with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. So for Micah, he did the things right in the offseason that they wanted him to do. Brian Schottenheimer challenged him up front. Schotty told me this back in March at the meeting. He had come to him, basically said, like, I'm going to challenge you to be a leader. I'm going to challenge you, to be more present. And Mike is always going to do his own thing. He's not going to be there through all the voluntary stuff in the spring, but he did show up. He did some things in mini camp. He was on the field a little bit. He showed up to training camp, even at a time where, there was nothing close in terms of a contract. Mulugeta, in general, has had his guys show up, more hold-ins than hold-out types of situations. But at some point, all these guys who are holding in or out have to make the decision, how much time do I need to get ready for the season? So if you're going to push any of those buttons, the natural next thing would be a trade request. But, the idea that the other part of that tweet said he's considering severing his relationship with the team. Well, good luck. You're on the 5th-year option. They've got 2 franchise tags, and they've played it out with their quarterback. Why wouldn't they do it with the pass rusher? Again, Micah has all sorts of platforms. He's got a podcast. He's not afraid to post things on X, Rich. There's any number of things that he could do. If you remember back last year, CeeDee Lamb said nothing. Micah's talked a few times. He talked to our Jane Slater on the Insiders last week. But, CD said nothing, except then Jerry made a comment about the contract negotiations, and CD sent like a sly one-sentence tweet out that everyone's like, oh, man, he's firing back at Jerry here. This is just, I hate to say it, but this is the normal course of business for the Cowboys. Micah can request a trade. It's something that back on Super Bowl Sunday, Ian Rappaport and I, in our story on this being the offseason of the pass rusher, which definitely has been the case.
Right.
We mentioned that they had internal discussions going back to last year about, is it the right thing to keep Micah and have a really top-heavy roster with Dak, CD, and Micah eating up about half your salary cap, or should they trade him for a boatload of assets? But again, Rich, I come to this. If you were going to trade a Micah Parsons, you don't do it now. It's not impossible. We saw Khalil Mack get traded late, in the process several years ago. We've seen other training camp types of trades, but there's very little. You could trade them for other players at the same position. That's always a possibility. I never say never on any of this, but if you were trying to maximize the value for Micah Parsons, August 1st is not the time. So we'll see what he ends up doing here. But for every lever pulled, there's a counter lever that the team can pull here, including, finding Micah Parsons at a time that, to this point, it does not seem like they've been doing since he showed up to camp.
My God, top of August. This is still going on. I mean, so I guess, again, and I'll be honest with you, man, I feel like it's Groundhog Day. We're talking about it every single day. Is it really just come down to it? Hey, I thought we had a handshake agreement. You wanted me to talk to your agent, who I then act like I don't know who he is, even though he's done $1 billion of deals. Is that why we're at where we're at? And then they're not negotiating at all right now?
There's a lot of reasons for it.
Right.
In terms of,
and some must involve Micah too. I imagine, because that's what the Joneses keep saying as well.
Well, that was where the handshake was Micah and Jerry. So obviously at that time it seemed like, all right, we're in a good place. But that was 4 months ago.
Right.
I mean, we're in a different spot at this point.
Right.
We know this. I know I've mentioned it on the show before, Rich, but the Cowboys' history has been long deals. They want to do 5-6 year extensions, strong cash flow up front, but then they buy up those team-friendly years on the back end.
Right.
Well, Mulugeta is far from the only agent who prefers to do shorter-term deals. Why would you want to hit your client to sign a 6-year contract and be 30 years old when you're clamoring for a new one here versus do, let's call it, a 4-year contract and get another bite at the apple, well before you turn 30. That's also a dynamic here. Jerry, just the way that he moves, the things he says publicly. I mean, you saw all kinds of people talking when Jerry made those comments about the time Micah had missed. He overstated the number of games he had missed, and talking about Dak got hurt. And, anytime you're talking about these high-paid guys and, they might not even be out there playing, and it's because of injury, that's something that doesn't always sit well with certain corners of the locker room either. So a lot of different things. All logic would tell you Micah Parsons is a Cowboy in 2025, but what plays out in the 30, what are we down to, about 34 days until their opener?
Right.
We'll find out. It's still pretty early before it gets late.
And it's a good point of you making right there, Tom, before we move on, about the short-term contracts, because you want your contract to come up before you're 30, because take a look at the ages of all the guys we've been talking about over the last few weeks. TJ Watt turns 31 this year. Trey Hendrickson turns 31 this year. Myles Garrett turns 30. And McLaurin turns 30 in the middle of September. And they're all been the guys that we've been talking about since the Super Bowl up to this point. Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. What are you learning in Tampa? What's the scoop there? What's the word? What's the storyline? What do you got for me?
Well, the biggest news before practice that I reported is that Baker Mayfield not out here today.
Right.
He followed through, my understanding, on a pass yesterday, hit his hand on a shoulder pad, which I said this to Todd Bowles. I'm like, that would be my worst fear as a head coach.
Yeah.
It's just like it's an average play, and all of a sudden it's a thumb and it's cracked and it's 8 weeks. But he's like, hey, it's got to be full contact. It's football. There's going to be stuff that happens. But he said it's probably going to be a day, and then Baker's going to be back out here.
Okay.
They put him through the full battery of tests yesterday. My understanding is it revealed nothing. That was precautionary. He's got a contusion. He's got a bruise on his hand. It's nothing long term. Baker's tough. They're just being very careful with him right now. I'd say beyond that, Mike Evans and Todd Bowles mentioned this too. This is one of the best he's looked and the freshest he's looked in a long time, which is pretty
good.
Amazing when you're talking about a guy going into the 12th year of his career. Chris Godwin's not out here yet. He's ahead of Tristan Wirfs, Bowles told us, in terms of just being able to get back on the field, both recovering from significant injuries. But they got dudes out here, Rich, in terms of the playmakers on offense. When Emeka Egbuka, of course, is the first-round draft pick. Godwin, when he gets back. Mike Evans, Dylan McMillan, who had a really good year. Bucky Irving, certainly is somebody who's emerged. Kate Otten as well. They're going to be able to score some points. And maybe the thing they're most encouraged about here, too, is what they're seeing with some of the young players on defense. Benjamin Morrison, Has been everything that they've been looking for so far, coming off an injury at Notre Dame. And then they also had another corner that they drafted who's been playing in the nickel for him through the course of camp. So Jason Light, the GM, has been one of the better drafting GMs within the league. That's why they always have a very strong roster. Just traveling around to teams, Rich, I would say there's a lot of people who, when the topic of the NFC South comes up, to say, that's still the best roster in the division. It's just a matter of, for them, when they get into the playoffs, can they get over the hump?
All right, where else you been before I let you go? And then I'll pick and choose as to what training camps I might be interested in asking a question about before I let you go. Where else you been?
I was in Detroit on the first day. First thing you notice there is you don't hear Aaron Glenn's voice when you walk in. Still really physical. I saw like 5 guys get laid out in the practice. I mean, it's a classic Dan Campbell type of team. They're really encouraged about Jameson Williams. That's one of the names that kept coming up over and over, as well as the rookie receivers that they drafted. For the Bills, that was my second stop on Sunday in Rochester. They practiced through like a 20 or 30-minute complete and utter downpour, which you don't always see in the NFL. Josh Allen's Josh. We got a chance to talk with him. He got married. He got a $330 million contract, but still going about his business the same way. James Cook showed up on time.
Okay.
He looks really good. He's a little bit thicker in the upper body, which they like. And so that's a guy that, to keep an eye on here. Obviously, his contract situation still playing out, but he's looked really good in the early portion of camp. I did a double dip on Monday, hung out with the Commanders. Maybe the biggest thing there, besides obviously the McClaurin stuff, is defensively. They've really remodeled that whole thing. The entire secondary, there's only 2 guys left in the cornerback group who were even on the team last year. They thought that was a weakness. They injected talent at every level of that defense. Obviously, they've got one of the oldest rosters in the NFL. They're managing that. They just added Von Miller. Von's not doing a ton yet in terms of on the field, but I talked to Joe Witt Jr., who said Von's also, in the meeting rooms, he's like running a sort of tutorial, teaching all the young guys his pass rush moves. So that alone, is a bonus there. Then I rolled up to the Ravens training camp. Lamar's Lamar. I got a chance. I showed Lamar a photo of the two of us together the day after he got drafted. And he lit up with a big grin on his face. It's amazing to think back to that day. And the first question to the coaches who were up there at the podium that next day, I remember it, clear as day, it was, what position is Lamar playing? That's a pretty wild first question when you think back to this guy winning 2 NFL MVPs since, they're loaded. They got a ton of corners, which, they got like 5 or 6 legit corners. Part of that's because in that division, especially when you're going up against the Cincinnatis, you got to be able to roll deep at that position and match up. I went to the Jets. I talked with Aaron Glenn after practice. There's a lot of comparisons there to when he came in with Detroit and with Dan Campbell and the way that they turned that thing around. But I'm just telling you, Rich, like looking at that team, they got more talent across the board than the Lions did. The Lions had Jared Goff and they had a good offensive line. The Jets have, the Lions didn't have anybody like Sauce. They didn't have anybody like Garrett Wilson. They didn't have anyone like Quinnen Williams. How is that all going to come together? A lot of that's going to come down to Justin Fields. And so the process they're going through after he dodged, the near-death experience, according to social media, when he got his toe stepped on, it's about figuring out what does he do well, and now how do we build an offense around those things? He doesn't have to play. He doesn't have to be a 70% completion guy. Just make more plays down the field. That's going to get teams out of that single high safety coverage that they play, where everybody's down defending against the run. Then all of a sudden you got more shots on the outside. That's kind of the give and take, that they're looking at there. And then I was in Cincinnati yesterday. Probably the best news there, Rich. It was indoor practice because it was an absolute monsoon out there. But now it's one day. All right, I don't want to overstate it. But in that one day at practice, the defense looked good. The defense has all these young, really fast dudes. Some of them are coming back from injuries. But DJ Turner had like 5 pass breakups in that practice. DJ Ivey is back from his injury. There's no Trey Hendrickson clearly out there yet. But Shamar Stewart, I talked to Al Golden before practice. They're not looking at this as, well, he missed the time in the spring. He's got a lot to learn. No, they're throwing it at him, and they want him to be a big factor this year. Anytime that, you're breaking up passes intended for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow back there, I even said this to Joe. I'm like, I know you want to complete every pass, but aren't you kind of looking at that like, hell yeah, we need a little bit of that? He's like, no doubt. There is an element of that. They all know where their shortcomings were. They were the team nobody wanted to see on offense down the stretch, and nobody did have to see them in the playoffs because the defense faltered here. We'll see how much of an improvement they make. Different scheme. They're going to be more multiple this year. I'm just telling you that one day you can see what Duke Tobin have done and company have done in terms of building, especially the speed on the back end. They're going to be really young in the secondary. Dax Hill is on his fifth-year option, is like the veteran of that group. But if they can stay healthy here, you would hope that they're going to be better than they were a year ago.
Tom Pelissero right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Just put him in 100-degree weather, wind him up, and let him go. Near-death experience. With the 3 words he referred to Justin Fields getting his toe stepped on a couple days ago. So you're heading to where? Miami, Duval as well, I imagine?
Again, could have thought through this one a little bit differently here, Rich, but I am entirely in the Southeast for the rest of this trip. So I will be hitting, I saw the Bucks, I'll hit the Dolphins tomorrow, then the Saints, Falcons, Panthers, Jaguars. That will round out my 13 camp in 12-day tour, and it's a ton of fun, man. It's a ton of fun just watching these teams back to back and kind of being able to compare the vibe and the tempo and all these things. So
well, the Dolphins, again, the subject matter du jour is Tua being really open about the Tyreek Hill, I'm out of here comment, and being open about how Tyreek needed to sort of commit, do some penance with his teammates. But the thing I'm really keen about is that back end of that defense. I mean, they changed out a lot, obviously, and they're also banged up, and that's a major concern, I think, that's right now in terms of injuries that we're seeing all over the place happening.
I would say this, like I don't have every trade and every transaction in front of me, Rich.
Right.
But I don't remember another team in my time covering this league changing as much at this stage in the year as the Dolphins have. I mean, they made 2 trades during 4th of July week, like after OTAs and minicamp and everything were over, shipping off Jalen Ramsey, who they'd been shopping for months, bringing in Micah Fitzpatrick, also shipping off Jonnu Smith, then trading for Darren Waller. Then they get into camp and they sign Jack Jones, who frankly was available for a reason. And there's still some moving parts there. I mean, Chris Grier's been very active through the course of this offseason. But with Tyreek, remember, they made the choice. We're going to trade Jalen Ramsey. I know Grier made an offhand remark about, when he was asked, do you trade Tyreek too? And he said, well, if somebody wants to give me a couple ones, nobody realistically is going to give him anything close to that. He'd be lucky to get a single one for him. But they're fully proceeding as if Tyreek Hill is going to be on that team. And, listen, Tyreek was through a lot last year. Some of it not his fault, some of it definitely his fault. And I'm not totally shocked. Tua, we think of Tua as being kind of a quieter guy, but it's very apparent from the coaching staff on down, they want to try to get the best out of Tyreek. And listen, if Tyreek goes off, I know he's talking about 2,000 yards, let's say even 1,500 yards. If he has a good year, and we're not talking about other things in Tyreek Hill's life this season, he might have one more big contract in him. I mean, there's not many dudes who bring that flamethrower speed like he does. They need that guy along with Jalen Waddle, along with Darren Waller. We'll see who else they potentially might, bring in as this thing rolls forward here. But they need those guys because when Tua's been healthy and the playmakers have been on the field, they have been a pretty potent offense, which will cover up some of those moving parts on the defense.
Well, when you're filling in this chair 10 days from now for a couple days, Tom, rest assured, full on air conditioning. Don't you worry. It's indoors. We're good. It's all good.
We're holding up. We're holding up. I got a lot of fans here right now, but this is,
nice.
I the clouds. This is a pretty good shot here. I got that framed up pretty good.
Nice. You did. Tommy P.
Tom, you're on fire.
You're the best, Tom. Thanks again, brother. That's Tom Pelissero here on The Rich Eisen Show. Catch The Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.